Okay, so I still have to grade the swimsuit assignment and the second of the compositing assignments. Everything else I'm pretty much caught up on. That's not true. There may be still a couple of the first of the compositing assignments that are grading the compositing assignments. If I haven't sent any of that out yet. I don't think any feedback to you guys yet. You won't believe how long and exhaustive I go into that stuff. So they just take a lot of time. I apologize for that, but I swear to you, I will have it done this week. So at any rate, for what that's worth. But I did finish up the assignment where the girl had the red fur that was on the green screen. I want to do that together in class because I want to show you a couple of things about it that I think you need to look for. For the most part, most people did an okay job of it, but I want to do that collectively. It'll go really fast. I think... Wait, it was assignment 8 something, so it means the files have got to be in 8. Yeah, so if you go to your assignment to session 8, inside your assignment folder, there's this green screen test. If you can double click that one, again, it's just a girl standing on a green screen. We did go over doing green screen in the studio the other week, so if you take a look at this, it's the exact same setup that we had going on there, for what that's worth. So can everybody find this file? Anybody not find this file? Okay, so we are going to go ahead and knock this out and just remove the spill. I've got my tablet going. I'll give you 30 seconds to get yours going if you want to. While people are looking for their tablets, does everyone have in your actions palette, does everyone have the zero selective color knockout action? Anyone not? Okay, great. So I'm going to go find that zero selective color action in my history palette and just click on the little arrow at the bottom pointing to the right to run the action. My screen does turn up black, which is how the action actually should work. If yours turned out and looks sort of more like this sort of like solarized version of it, it's because you, in your properties panel, the radio button is set to relative and not absolute, so make sure it is on absolute. Your image should be black because what we've in effect done with this action is that we've created a selective color adjustment layer, and we took every single one of these drop-down menus, all the primary colors, all the secondary colors, and the entire tonal range, and said to Photoshop, we want you to fill all of those with black ink, and that's why we end up with a completely black image. However, now if you use your drop-down menu and you come down to greens and drag your black slider from the entire right side plus 100% black ink over to the complete left-hand side, which is a minus 100% ink, it basically is saying anything that Photoshop considered in this image that was that was green, we're going to now actually fill with white ink, and that's why it's getting lighter. The reason it didn't go completely white is because that green of the green screen is not a pure green, or at least it's not a pure green in the way Photoshop defines pure green. So had it been, it would be now white. The trick to this, though, is that we can actually make it a more pure green, and that's what the hue saturation layer is that's underneath it. So if you go back over to your layers palette, you click on the middle of the adjustment layers, the one that is hue saturation. Photoshop still knows that this is Photoshop still knows all the color that's underneath this. And the reason it knows that is that what's turned this image black and white is the very top layer, the selective color layer. Photoshop knows that right underneath it is all that color, and so so we can use the targeting adjustment tool that is in the properties panel. The hand that's actually got the arrow that points to the right and left, that's the targeting adjustment tool. If you click on that and then come over on your image and you just click once, you will actually see that it changes the range of your image to be that very select green range. And then you can actually take, again, I just click on this and drag the slider, and you can actually drag the slider all the way to the right, which increases your saturation, or you can go all the way to the left, which decreases the saturation. And now if you go all the way to the left, basically what's happened here is that I've desaturated the green to the point that it has no longer got any green in it. And so the image goes black again because everything else in the selective color layer that was at the very top said to make everything else in this thing black. So again, I'm going to simply click on that same area and drag all the way to the right, but then you need to zoom in and take a look at this girl's hair. And this is one of the issues that we actually have in all of this. So I'm taking a look at her hair right now, and actually it's not looking too bad for me. Although if you take a look at the hairs that are on the right hand side, you can see a strange thing that sort of begins to happen. Some of the hairs actually flip to white in here. If you zero out your saturation, so I'm going to grab the saturation slider and drag it all the way back down to 0, you can see that all the hairs seem to be black on a dark gray background. And as you start to push that saturation up, that's still staying that way, but then the minute I sort of get to around a saturation of a plus 53, things start to change. You can see there's some hairs in here that are all of a sudden starting to go white. And that's actually because they have spill in them. And so because they are green, I'm actually pushing them to white as well. And as I continue that process, you can really see it up in this area right here, where there are hairs in here now that have gone completely white in here. And this is what, when I've come back to you guys and said, your mask is too aggressive, your mask is too aggressive, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Even though this is doing a really good job of helping to separate the stuff around the body, it's doing a horrible job in the hair. So we need to actually back this thing off. So that's typically what I'm looking at when I'm doing all of this work. So I'm going to back my saturation off. So I'm back around a 40, and it seems pretty good on that side. Check the other side. If you take a look at the other side, down on the lower part of it, you can see the same thing is happening again right here. So there are these little white hairs that are in here that are being blown out too hard. So I'm going to continue to drag my hue saturation down. And as I keep going down, I'm looking at this, and even it is when I've completely zeroed it out, I've still got those little hairs down there that are lighter, and I'm never going to get those back. So I am okay with that. I'm going to pump up my saturation again till around that 40. That was where it seemed to work pretty good on the other hand. It still seems a little aggressive to me. I'm going to drop it down to about a 30-ish. Yeah, I can live with that. So I'm going to go ahead and then come back over to my channels palette. So in the channels palette, if you take what we're looking at right now is the composite RGB. And even though this image is black and white, the red, green, and blue channel are all exactly equal. However, they're not the same as the composite RGB guy. And to see what I mean, if you click on the red channel, you'll actually see it, and then go back to the RGB guy. You're not seeing it here. There you go. If you take a look just at the red channel, when I clicked on that, that background is considerably lighter than the RGB composite. So you don't want to load the luminosity of the RGB composite. You simply want to grab either the red, green, or blue. Those are all the same. They're all black and white. They are the same. So I'm going to click on the blue channel and copy it. And then I'm going to throw away my zero selective color adjustment layers. They've done their work. I don't need to keep them. It's just, and so this can kind of explain what's going on. There's some super light white hairs in here. I'm sure there's some fake extensions in here. That's kind of what's going on, is my guess. So at any rate, I'm going to click on the blue copy to actually just see the blue copy. I'm going to zip back out. And then if I take a look around, I can see there is contamination. I can see that her necklace, I can still see part of her necklace. If you look down, you can actually pick up part of her dress in here. There's other things that are happening in here. So even though my background appears to be black, it's not. So I'm going to sit down 2 color sampler points. So click on the eyedropper tool on your left-hand side toolbar. Click on the flyout menu and come down to color sampler tool. I'm going to zip into where I think I see her necklace, and I'm going to hit a spot that I think is the lightest of the necklaces, the parts of it. And then I'm simply going to come out and hit another spot on the background. I've got 3 spots on mine right now. I don't know where the original one came from, so I'm going to hit clear all at the very top in my options bar because I've got a renegade point somewhere out there, and then I'm going to reset those 2 points and one in the background. So now I'm going to actually go after levels in this, but if you take a look at your info palette, you can see that the values are in K for the black of CMYK. You need to click on each eyedropper in the drop-down menu and come down and select to give you an RGB readout as opposed to a K readout. You can see in my case, they're not too far apart, but they're far enough for this to actually work. I've got a 13 on my point number 1. That's the necklace, the dark part of the necklace on her body, and then a 94 on the background. So I'm going to zip back out to watch this happen. I'm going to hit, again, I'm working on my blue copy, Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. I'm going to grab my white point triangle that's all the way to the right of the histogram, and I'm going to drag it all the way back and get close to where you see the big spike in on the histogram. I'm going to continue to work my way back, looking at the after numbers of my point number 2. I'm trying to get close to 254, but not quite there. If you, like me, you go to 255 like this, back it off again until you get to something less than 255. I'm at 250 right now. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and just tap them in until I hit 255. I'm then going to grab my black point slider and start to pull it towards the center. Again, now watching my after values on my number 1, and I'm going to continue to kick this back until I get close to 0, but not at 0. I'm at 3 right now. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap that in. The minute you do get to 0, recheck your point number 2 after values, make sure they didn't change. But before you say okay to that, zip back into that hair. We need to take a look at what's really going on with this hair. So again, especially on the right-hand side, I'm going to use my preview check mark to turn it on and off to see if I'm doing any really serious damage to this. And for the most part, things look like they're pretty intact. Am I losing some super little fine hairs? Yes, I am, but look at the stuff that's happening like on the very top of her head. I'm keeping some weird shit going on in there, so all of this is being somewhat believable to me. I don't feel like, I feel like this is doing exactly what I sort of needed to do. There's some weirdness in her hair on this other side over here. I'm going to fix that with an overlay brush later. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. And then I'm going to double click the hand to kick all the way back out and take a look at my mask right now. And sorry, I'm going to invert it really quickly, Command I, just to invert it. It's easier a lot of times to see if you've got contamination, certainly on the figure. So I've just got a white copy of the figure. This is what it's ultimately going to be anyway, because you want the mask to actually show the background. Show the figure and hide the background. And I can see as I get down here that things are looking pretty good. They're looking pretty good in the fur as well. Oh, not looking so good here. So if I take a look at my at the area of the background right around the fur, it is full of contamination. I can see all of this. It's just full of contamination. Now I can try going after this with a brush again, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually add another color sampler point to this area down there. So again, back to my eyedropper, color sampler point. And I'm going to zoom in on this. You want to pick one of those lightest pieces of light color background. So I'm going to click on that number 3. Again, click on my drop-down menu, change my drop-down menu to give me RGB color readout. It's reading in the 15, so I'm going to hit this same thing again with a levels adjustment a second time, Command L. It's only down in the base now, so I'm going to grab my black point slider, drag it to the center, towards the center, till I get to like a 3 in my after readout. Go to my arrow keys and tap that in till I just get to 0. It's a whole lot easier than using an overlay brush if that's the case, so because you're doing really big wholesale areas. However, you need to zip back out we need to go check to see what this move is actually doing to the hair again. So I'm going to zip back into the hair. I need to make sure that this, whatever I'm doing right now, is worth it. So using my preview button on and off, I'm going to see what that actually did. And for me, looking at what this did to the hair, I feel like it's doing more damage to her hair up in that right-hand part than is really worth it for me to actually do this wholesale move. So I'm not going to use levels for this. I'm going to cancel that out. I'm going to zip back out. I'm going to look at the area to try to see where all of this background mess starts. And I can see it pretty much all the way around this figure. So instead, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to leverage both. I'm going to do a history snapshot of what my image looks like right now. So I'm going to go to my history palette. I'm going to click on snapshot, and I'm going to call this pre-level and say OK to that. Then I'm going to run levels again on that background because I want that to do all the work on the background. So Command L. I still have my number 3 point over here, so I'm going to grab my shadow point slider, start to drag towards the middle until I get close to 0, but not at 0. Go to my arrow keys and actually tap this in until I get to 0. This will now do the damage up to that upper hair that I was talking about. It will get rid of this part that I wanted to keep, but I've got a history state that will allow me to return just that part. And I think that that's an easier thing than trying to use an overlay brush to do all of the background. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. Immediately go to your overlay, to your history palette, scroll up to the very top, and where the history state that's at the very top of your history palette where it says pre-level, do not select pre-level. You simply want to put the brush icon to the left of that small little thumbnail that's sitting in there. If you click on that, now your history brush will paint your image to what it looked like when that state was made. And when that state was made, I hadn't lost all the fine little hairs that are on the right-hand side. So then I'm going to grab my history brush. And I'm going to go to my tablet now. I'm going to check and make sure that my history brush is completely soft. I want to make sure it's a blending mode of normal. 100% opacity, 100% flow. I'm going to make it a little bit larger using my bracket keys. And then I'm simply going to paint in that entire edge. I'm going to work my way all around the hair just to make sure I haven't lost, because there's little bits of the other stuff that will have been lost as well. So I'm going to pick up all the stuff that's on the top of her head. I'm going to see what happens on this other side, because there was shit on the other side that I didn't want. So yeah, look up at my screen here really quickly. This area that's right in here, there's some background shit noise in here. That's not hair. So I just brought this back. I don't want that back. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm going to avoid that area. So it's sort of doing two things for me. It's getting rid of a problem, and as a matter of fact, I'm trying to do that all along this edge, and the problem exists. So on the right-hand side, it worked great, but on the left-hand side, it's picking up all this garbage in the background. So I'm going to hit Command Z and undo that. I'm going to zip down here and see what it looks like down in the bottom. I actually think it's adding stuff that I want to keep down in the bottom, so I'm just going to continue to work that way down, and I'm going to call it a day there. That looks pretty good to me. Then I'm going to come over to, I still have stuff that I need to clean out on the very bottom, so I'm going to zip in around her feet. I am going to do this with an overlay brush, just the regular B key. Change your brush from normal down to overlay. I'm going to make this a medium hard brush to give me a little bit of control. I'm going to make black my foreground color, so hit X to make black your foreground color. And then I'm going to zoom in around her shoes, and I'm simply going to paint around them. And that actually gives me a good selection there. I'm going to paint around the other side as well. I'm going to hit where I'm missing on the floor a couple of times. Again, don't make this tool work any harder than it needs to work. This one little area, look at the very bottom of my screen really quickly. There's a small little part right there. A lot of times I would go after this using the pen tool, but I'm going to cheat right now and just go back up to normal. Change it to a completely hard brush. and just do a small pop right there and one right next to it. And then go back to my overlay brush, back to a 50% hardness, and see what we need to do. We got to go after the area, the edge that's underneath the fur. There actually needs to be hit a couple of times under the fur to get rid of the shadow, and a couple of times under there to clean up the shadow, because I don't want the shadow of the fur on the floor. And I'm just going to continue to run my way down along all of this. I'm going to zip back out so that I can do this faster. Make my brush a little larger. And come out right off the edge. There's 2 parts in there to get those shadows out. Everybody else is looking pretty good there. I've still got the other side of her shoe. And I'm going to zip back out now. So the rest of this is actually looking pretty good. I'm going to go to a completely normal brush now and make it a completely hard brush, because I've got all the lines that I need to actually work in, and make it a little bit smaller just to get this. And I'm just going to buy myself a little more room. You can do the same thing. And I'm going to hit the F key to go to my paste board, because I hate working with really small brushes. Just go ahead and make my brush much larger. And kick this all the way out. Zip back out. And I've got the sides that I just need to paint in. You could also select the sides using the lasso tool and just fill them with black. It would do the same thing. So I've got my mask made right now. At this stage of the game, I would save my work. And then come back over to my layers palette, and I'm going to add a white layer on top of this. So I'm going to click on an adjustment layer and say I want to add a solid color. It comes up with whatever the foreground color was, but you can use the eyedropper tool to sample the background color, which is white. It's just a faster way to get to white, and go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to then click on my background layer, the original version one, and I'm going to hit Command J to make a copy of it. I'm going to then drag that background copy layer above my solid white adjustment layer, and then I'm going to come over to my blue copy. I'm going to double click on that and rename it Knockout. I'm going to command click on just the thumbnail, and then back over to my background copy, the one that's on the top, and add this as a layer mask. I'm going to then zip in and take a look. And I feel like I got the hair pretty well in there. I do have spill in here, which I can fix, but I feel like I got the gist of the hair part. That part actually, I think looks actually really pretty good. So to fix the spill, and this will be the last part that we actually do with this, I'm going to select the pixel part of it, not the mask, but the pixel part of it. Hit the B key to get a brush. In this part, I'm going to actually do, because I'm working along her face, I'm going to do a completely hard brush. I'm going to change my blending mode from normal down to color, because using color, what will happen is that it will change the color, but it will respect the luminosity. So I will keep all the highlights and the shadows, that's luminosity, but I'll change the color from green to the color of her hair. So I'm going to zip in a little closer on this, make my brush a little bit smaller, and then you need to ask yourself, what color would this hair be? Well, the hair that's at the very top in the back, you can already see is on a little bit darker side. So I'm going to start by sampling a dark part of her hair. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and then click the dark sample, and you'll see it changes your color sampler to a dark brown. And then I'm going to simply just kind of work my way on the background down here. Now, when I do that, for me looking at this, it puts an enormous amount of red into this. The thing about this is that a lot of people would undo this right now. They would hit Command Z, they would undo this. You don't have to do that. This red that's in her hair right now is no different than the green. It's just a color. So instead, I'm going to come over to the more blonde part of her hair that's on the very top of her head, hold down the Option key and sample that, and paint right over the same thing again. So it doesn't matter that you made maybe not the best choice for your first color. You can actually continue to have that. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that part. This is now back to the red. You can also mix colors here at this stage of the game. So let's say that you can't get the real color you want. You've got too much red here, but when you paint it on in the blonde part, whatever, it actually had too much yellow in it. You can drop the opacity of your brush down to 50% and paint now over this, and now this will be a mix of the red that you started with and the yellow that you're actually going to. And for my money, it actually ends up being pretty well done in here. I mean, I like that sort of coloring more. You can also click on your foreground color picker, and if you say, well, I want it a little bit darker, simply click on the B for brightness radio button, drag your slider down to make it a little bit darker, say okay, and then continue to do your work and bring it on down, bring it down. The reason I'm keeping a hard edge brush is that I'm trying to feather this whole area that's right next to her head. But I'm thinking, Jesus, this isn't working. And then I look up at my options palette and see that it's set to 52%. It wasn't at 100%. So I've got to repaint over all of that. But anyway, the reason I'm keeping this hard edge is that I can't have this brush hit her face, because if it hits her face, you can see on my screen right now, it makes it completely yellow like the color of her hair, which I don't want to do. So this is just a way that I can control it really close to her head. Now when you get down to her, to the boa part that's down at the bottom, again what I would do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to get this area that goes right around her face. If you hit onto her face a little bit, just go over to her face, hold down your Option key, sample some skin tone, and then just paint it back out again. If you overprint, like I've put hair color onto the boa, and that's not really the boa's color. The boa's got a lot of sort of magenta in it. I'm going to resample that, and then again, just paint over the boa part. I don't need to worry about the hair part that's actually in there. That's putting a lot of gray in there to me, so I'm going to try to get a little bit lighter tone of boa. You can also click again on the foreground color picker to open it up, and we can brighten this up a little bit so that it actually doesn't gray out so much. And again, I feel like that this is now too strong, so I'm going to drop my opacity down. You could also do this using flow, so that you could really sort of paint it in, but yeah, that gives me a little bit more believable color out there. And then I'm simply going to work my way along the lines. By the time that you actually get out to the boa now, or to whatever that thing is on the edge of her, you can actually go to a much softer brush. You won't see the line as much, so I'm going to completely go to a soft brush, click on this, resample my color down here, and then just get rid of the rest of all this spill. And so that's basically how we go through doing this again. If you take a look down on the ground at the floor of her feet, we've done a pretty good job. We don't really have the shadow that's under her foot, but we do see underneath her foot. We've kept all that part. The rest of everything here is actually looking pretty good, and we're off to the races. A few of you missed the green spill that was on the boa between her legs and the one that's also between the other arm. I would also choke this, I'm pretty sure, because if you take a look at the edge right here, you can see that it actually does need to be choked. So we'll do this one really quick, and then we're going to move on to something else. Back to your history palette, do a history snapshot, call this pre-choke, and say okay. Click on your layer mask, and I'm looking at her left, or her hand that's on the right hand side. It's her right hand. It's actually her left hand on the right hand side. My wife gets so confused about this shit, it's ridiculous. She was a model for years, and so she always relates to left and right as if it were a mirror. So it's always the exact opposite for her. So now I don't ever bother to try to say, oh, let's go right. I always just go Okay, so first move is to run a Gaussian blur filter on this. We need to introduce shades of gray into the edge of our mask. So up to blur, down to Gaussian blur. Again, make sure you're working on the mask. Mine, that 4.5 is too strong, so I'm going to just crank it back to like a 3. That seems good enough for me. That might be a little aggressive, but we'll see. Just make it a straight 3. I'm going to say OK to that. Then I'm going to run levels on this, Command L, still working on this layer mask. I'm going to grab the shadow slider and start to drag it, and you'll see it starts to pull the line in. But now if you look at this, you'll also see that, take a look at my screen here, you can see, so it got rid of that spill line that's on here, but the edge here is still really, it's soft. It's way too soft. So to sharpen this up, you grab your white point slider and start to drag it towards the middle, because what that's now doing is it's building contrast along the edge. So if you take a look at what's going on, I want to show you what this is happening behind the scenes. So hang on one second. Cancel out of this so you can see it in the mask itself. So this is my mask right here. As I put levels on this, I'm going to start to drag my black point slider, which chokes this, which is exactly what I want to do. It brings it in, but we still have a really soft edge, and it's because of the gray tones that are spilling into the white. So if I then grab my white point slider and start to pull it in, if you drag it in all the way next to each other, look at this. You can make this thing as sharp as a pen tool would make it. Now, that's not my suggestion, but I'm just saying don't leave it so soft. You can actually choke it to make it a little bit better here. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. I think that probably got me close, close enough for government work. But then I'm going to snapshot this, and we'll call this post choke. And say OK to that. I'm going to zip back out because I know what it's done. I know it's done very bad things. So look what it did to her hair. It's absolutely destroyed her hair. But again, working on your layer mask, you need to make sure if you're using your history brush that you've got the proper thing. If you use your history brush to restore the mask to what it looked like before we did the choke, you cannot have the pixel content selected because you won't see any change. So again, on the layer mask, I'm going to go up to the top of my history palette where it says pre-choke. I'm going to make sure, again, you do not want to click on the history state. You simply want to add the little history brush icon to the left of the thumbnail by clicking on that. Then make sure you select your history brush. You can make it pretty large because, again, it's not going to bring back anything I don't want. And then simply run this across the whole top of her head. And again, anything that's got the boa in it, because it'll have ruined all the boa parts. It'll do a good job on her body, but it'll ruin the boa parts that are between her legs, the stuff that's underneath in between her arms. It'll ruin all of that part. And a lot of times it goes after shoes in a really big way. So I'm just going to run it around the shoes. That part seems pretty good to me. And I'm also going to run it along the entire fur because there's a good chance the choke actually went after the fur as well. And then I'm going to be done. Boom. Questions about this? Shoot. Okay, any other questions about this? This is what just happened, just so that everybody knows, and you can actually make this happen. I'm going to put on, I'm going to just duplicate this layer right here. So I'm going to Command J the entire layer, and then I'm going to go to my history state again, to the pre-choke state, and I'm going to click on pre-choke, and I'm going to grab my history brush, and now I'm going to work on this layer that I've made, the second one that I've made. And when I go to try to click on it, you can see I get this warning. I get the circle with the slash through it. And if I click on it, this thing comes up and it says you cannot use the history brush because the history state doesn't contain this layer. We made this layer after the history state was created. So when we created the history state, this layer did not exist. And so I can't do anything with it because it wasn't there. It's not part of the history. Make sense? Sure, Verser. Okay, you can close this up. You don't need to save that. Are there any questions about this? All right. You do not need to save that. I need everybody, if they would please. How many people in here? Is anybody in here working in black and white? Well, just, you know, film or digital. You know, they do have digital black and white. Yeah, you'd be surprised. Okay, wait. So people in film, black and white. So people in film who do black and white, do you ever use filters?
Like orange filters and all that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So typically, I mean, the old school black and white, if you were to use, if you were shooting Caucasian skin tone, you would use a yellow 12, a Y12. What it does is it would actually bring the skin tone slightly down a little bit, makes it a little bit darker, gives it a little more character to it, that kind of stuff. If you were shooting men and you wanted to make them, you know, like rugged, like cowboys and lumberjacks and that kind of stuff, whatever, you would actually use a green filter, which would really drop the skin tone down, make it really dark. The other thing about yellow filters is they tend to lift the green of trees and grass. And, you know, I mean, if you shoot a lot of black and white, you'll see, you know, green grass and green trees, whatever. It's awful. It goes almost black in your images all the time, whatever. So you get it to lift so that you got a little bit of detail in it. Ansel Adams, classic. Ansel Adams, skies that are almost black, right? If you really take a look at all the stuff in Yosemite, all that kind of stuff, whatever, those really hyper black skies. Oh, Verser, what are you talking about? I didn't listen to Greg Foster Rice in any of those classes. All he was doing was his cowboy songs and shit, and I didn't care for it. So no, I have a profound respect for Greg. I poke fun at his little song and dance things all the time, but I tell him he's a brave man to do it. That's really my take on it, because I mean, it's like, you want to go for that, go for it, brother. But me, not so much. Anyway, really quickly, Ansel Adams. Images. So, yeah, I mean, like this kind of stuff. Forget the Ansel Adams. Just focus on the moonrise over whatever it was. I mean, you know, these really black skies. I mean, you can see it. These really dark, hyper black skies. I mean, that was like a trademark of his, whatever. You can do, all of that is done with filters. That, actually, if you want to do the Ansel Adams thing and you're shooting film, it's a 25R. That's just the name, the number of the filters. So at any rate, you can emulate this in Photoshop, but there's a way that you need to think about doing that. So to do that, if you look in our session, I think it's 14. Yes. So go to session number 14. Inside of session number 14, there is a black and white conversion folder. And inside that black and white conversion folder is file number 06.dng. This is another Bruce Fraser file. And if you actually open it up, double click on it, it is a DNG, so it should open up in Camera Raw. If it's, I don't really know if this has been processed at all, but to check to make sure, I should have a symbol over here that would show me in the thumbnail that it has been processed, but I don't see anything. But to make sure that this doesn't have any processing on at all, if you look on the far right-hand side of your inside of Camera Raw, there's 3 little dots that are sort of almost in the middle on the far right-hand side. If you click on those, you'll get a drop-down, and you can click on Reset to Default, and it will restore everything. This is how the image was actually shot. So now, there are people who will do a black and white conversion at this stage of the game, and personally I think that that's wrong, because this does not give you the same control that black and white conversion it will give that you get in Photoshop, and I'm going to show you why that is in just a second. But at this stage of the game, and this is one of the things that I'm talking to you guys about. You don't have the file? Okay, so session 14. All right, I'm giving you the file right now. Yeah. You should have done. I don't know what what's the signal that they use for the airplane? You know, like when the airplane they're coming in, they go. See, I'm doomed now because of my Greg Foster Rice shot. The ghost of Greg is in this room. No.
Oh my God.
No, I haven't.
Oh my God. The wig. The wig. Hold on.
That will come up in my Snapchat memories, and I'm just like, no.
That was so silly of him.
All right, hang on one second. I want to try to make sure that we don't run into some permission weirdness. Okay, so if you go to our server, it should be sitting right there, 06.dng. Did you get it? If you double click on it, are you now in Camera Raw? And then again, click on the little three dots that are sort of on the right hand side, almost in the middle, kind of at the bottom of the first tool set. Come down to, again, you'll have a reset to default if anything has been changed. If it's grayed out, this is basically how it was shot. Yes? When was the last time you uninstalled Photoshop and reinstalled it? Yeah, it sounds like something you'd need to do. I'm still king. Oh, no. All of that has been saved, and I've actually got copies of that as well. So you should have a independent copy of that retouching space. But there's just something that's not happy about again, I still don't know why we can't load any of those color lookup tables or any of that kind of stuff into your swatches folder. That just shouldn't happen. So if I don't know what your time is like at the end of the day, but if you want to hang out for 15-20 minutes, I'll go through it with you. All right. So anyway, does everybody else at least have this thing in here? Okay, great. So the first thing that I would say to you guys, again, when you look at this, what can you tell me about this file from just looking at it from an exposure point of view? Does this seem right to you? I think so too, right? It looks a little bit under to me, right? So you can start fucking with all of these things, but the first thing that I do is I simply come in. Well, the first thing I do is white balance. I look for something in here to white balance, and you can see that really probably the only thing in here to white balance would be the clouds in the background. And the problem in doing clouds in the background is that clouds have color casts all the time. If you think about sunset, you know, what do the clouds look at sunset? What do they take on that really orangey glow? So they're not a real reliable thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and accept the white balance on this. But what I'm not going to accept is, or what I'm going to look at is, I'm going to hit auto at the very top. And when you hit auto at the very top, what Photoshop does is a number of things. It looks at the image, and basically what it looks for is it looks for the lightest thing in your image, and it makes that white, and it looks for the darkest thing in your image, and it makes that black. But then it also looks at all of the tones that are in the middle of your image, and it tries to pull them apart as much as it can to increase your detail. Why would that increase your detail? So think about it like this. What we're talking about now is mid-tone contrast, and what we're really saying is, let's say you have two tones. Let's not deal with color. Let's just think about this in grayscale. Let's say that you have one gray tone that is 128 and another gray tone that's 126. They're right next to each other. Are you going to be able to tell the difference in those two? Never. However, if you can run contrast on them and pull them further apart, so let's say you do run contrast and you pull them apart and now you've got 128 and 118. Now they're 10 tones apart. Can you see that? Yes, you can. And your ability to distinguish between those two is detail. So what Photoshop does, all these numbers, if you click on this drop down light part, all the work that it does here in the middle on contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and black, all of that is to try to separate your tonal range as much as it possibly can be separated, that will then ultimately give you the most amount of detail in your image. But you might look at this and say, yeah, but it's too fucking light. I hate that. There's no reason that you can't accept what Photoshop has done for your midtones, but simply pull your exposure slider back down and say, wow, I really love it when it's here at this 0.8. I don't want to do that. You've still maximized your detail here in a way that you can't do. You cannot go in and look at an image with your eyeballs and do that kind of math. This is image analysis that happens underneath. There's no way you're going to go in there and say, okay, I know this needs to be pulled 10 tones apart here and only 5 tones apart there, whatever. You'll never know. So take advantage of this. So I'm going to leave mine at a, actually I'm going to leave it at a one-stop pop on there. We'll leave it a little bit more on the moody side. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So with this opened now, we can actually change it to a black and white. So I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer. And the advantage of the black and white adjustment layer is this. If you take a look at what's happened on your screen right now, you'll see the mix of how Photoshop built the black and white image. So what it's doing, if you take a look at these numbers in this drop-down menu right here, what it's actually doing is it's saying, okay, we're going to set red at a 40. Now this is an arbitrary number, but what you know is that it's saying the green of this image gets 1.5 times what the red gets in terms of our conversion to black and white. So for all of you people who've shot black and white film, don't you always struggle with blue skies? Don't they always blow out? Always. Tri-X is classic, Pan-X is classic, blue skies blow out. The reason they blow out is that when they're making black and white film, what they need to do is they need to look at all of the colors and they say, okay, how does that color translate tonally? Because you're getting rid of the color. And the problem that they have is that the chemistry that's involved in black and white film is hypersensitive to blue. And no matter what they do, they cannot get rid of its over hypersensitive to blue. So what happens is that because the film is hypersensitive to blue, it ends up being darker on your negative because it's too sensitive, and the darker part of your black and white negative ends up printing out light. Have you guys ever heard of panchromatic film? Panchromatic is what Tri-X is. It's pan, all colors, all color chromatic. Have you ever heard of orthochromatic? Orthochromatic is how safe light in a darkroom works. The paper in a darkroom is sensitive to all colors of light except for red or green, depending on, you can get different papers that are different, have different sensitivities or lack of sensitivity. But typically greens and oranges, that's an orthochromatic piece of paper. So if anybody in here ever print color in a darkroom? So in your color in a darkroom, you can't use a safe light because it's sensitive to all colors because color paper is panchromatic. Anyway, so we want to do the old Ansel Adams sky part. You can actually, anyway, that's what these whole values are about. It's how much of that color was given to making the black and white that we ultimately got. But we can change these values. So if you click on the targeting adjustment tool, I always use this tool because nobody really understands what color is in nature. I'll show you what that means. And then I'm simply going to click on the top part of the image on the sky. I'm going to click and I'm going to start to drag to the right, and you'll see it makes my sky lighter. And you can also see what's happening to the blue slider. It's getting pushed up. But if you want the Ansel Adams look, you push it to the other side, and lo and behold, you have Ansel Adams black sky, because it has taken the blue of your image to a -200. And then you say, well, yeah, but look at the transition as it's going to the horizon. The horizon is a completely different color. If you click on that, again, using your targeting adjustment tool, you can click and you can actually push that down a little bit more. But then you say, okay, I want to lift the tree. So what color is a pine tree? Oh, come on. You would all, if you went to the department store to be a Santa elf and Santa looked at you and said, what color is the Christmas tree? And you said, I don't know, red or something like that, they would be checking you for substance abuse, for drinking on the job. Then they would tell you you're too tall to do the job anyway and get out of here. Santa hates you anyway. You're not getting anything. No. Green. That's what everybody says it is, right? Well, click on the Christmas tree using your targeting adjustment tool and start to move your slider, and lo and behold, look what's moving. It's the yellow slider. Yellow is the dominant color in all the stuff that we think of as green foliage. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that look how you can push this color around. If you come down into the canyon area down in the bottom and click, and I'm pushing to the right to open it up, look at the contrast adjustments that we've made on this image alone just using this. You can't believe the additional control that you get doing this. And this is exactly how filters work. And the filters work by doing exactly this. They either filter out these colors or they actually filter all the colors out except for these colors. Make sense? So when I put a green filter on a camera, what's happening is that it's letting green come through. It's absorbing everybody else. So it's really giving green the dominant player. So in an effect, what that would be is pushing the green up and everybody else, I mean, I'm exaggerating here, everybody else down. But you guys get what's going on here? You can't believe how strong and powerful this tool is. And if you're really into doing black and white, it's amazing. So, okay. We can close that up. You do not need to save that. What did I just do? Oh, wait. Open that mother back up again. No, this will be the perfect thing to do with it. So I'm going to bring that open. It apparently isn't happy about that one. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and do the entire auto. So I'm going to click on auto again to completely brighten it up because I want to show you something else that's actually going on here. And I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. So there were people in here who were talking about wanting to extend backgrounds. So I'm going to show you again. I'm using the latest version of Photoshop. So I want to show you how I'm going to extend it. If you're on the latest version, you can do this with me. First thing is let's go to the paste board, hit the F key. Second thing to do is actually select the crop tool. So again, it's the fourth tool down. We haven't really talked about cropping in here, but it's the fourth tool down. And then what I want you to do is we're just going to extend the left side. Well, actually, we'll do both, but we're going to do them in separate passes. So I'm going to grab the control handle on the right-hand side, and I'm simply going to drag it out like about a ½ inch. And once it gets out, we actually need to then bring up the generative fill. Now, if you take a look up at your menu at the very top, you'll see there's a little thing up there that says Generative Expand. Also, if you're actually showing your contextual taskbar, you'll have Generative Expand in the bottom there as well. I'm going to click on the one on the very top and see what the drop down is. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do the Generative Expand. It's actually going to then hopefully at the very bottom now, it should have brought up your toolbar. You need to click on the Generate button and it will go through this little generative thing. And boom. And the thing to notice about this is that it not only added, you know, the canyon and all that kind of stuff, it actually added parts of the bush that are down, the shrub that's down at the very lower right-hand corner, but in a completely organic way. It wasn't just a clone stamp of that version. It also did some little trick on the end of the tree. You can also, if you look at your properties panel that's right up at the very top, you have different generative options. So right now it's just the one that's on the far left. If you click on the one in the middle, it'll give you another option. You can see it actually made more driftwood down at the bottom and did a completely different change at the top. If you click on the third one over, it actually just clipped off the end of the very top, and it also then gave you a different sort of like shrub thing at the bottom. If you're happy with any of these, you just accept it. If you're not happy with any of these, you can take a look. There's another generative button that's sitting right up above those three options. If you click on that, it'll do a whole nother set of generative fills, and you don't lose them. You're going to keep the original versions. You can see they're sitting right down here. It's just building 3 more of them for you. So I don't know that I would go through thousands of generations actually doing this part, but this one's got a lot more tree that's kind of up in the top part of it, or at least mine does. I kind of like that one is sort of more in the middle. And then the shrub is really growing big over here. And so from a compositional point of view, you might say, I'm going to go for the one in the middle, but you get where this is all going, right? So it's something to actually consider doing in all of this. And it'd be interesting to see what generative fill, did for your center part of your rooms. You should try that. Oh, it is?
I've been building some part, but I've also been adding filling it.
Got it. So, yeah, cool. So anyway, the downside to this is that there's a limit to the generative fill. It's limited by 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. So what a lot of people will do is if you have a really high res image like this, they'll do it in increments. So they'll simply select and they'll select a small part of it, generative fill, another small part, generative fill, another small part. So they'll do 4 passes all the way down this, or 6 passes all the way down here to do that, whatever, to sort of get around that. But it's just something to keep in mind, just because this is AI is coming, whether we will like this part or not. Okay, F key to get rid of that, F key again to get rid of that, and you can close this up. So last week we looked at panoramas. Today I want to look at focus stacking. So if you go to session number 13, there's a folder in there called Focus Stacking. There's 2 sets of files in here. There's also a PDF in here about focus stacking. And so this will sort of help you. It talks about how you want to shoot the images and all of. Actually, before we get to this, I need to finish something on panorama that we didn't talk about. You will not see this. You may not even hear this on the video, so I'm going to pause the video really quickly. Somebody remind me when I walk back up here to start this up again. Back on. So in focus stacking, if you take a look at the 2 folders that are in here, the first folder, it's a pretty obvious one. It's a ruler. We'll actually do the stack on that one. If we take a look at the second one, actually we'll stack both of these. So yeah, we'll stack both of them. So here's the thing. These are raw files. You can actually do that. The problem that we've gotten, the thing that will trip you up, is if in Photoshop, so everybody go to Photoshop really quickly, you don't need a file open in this, come up to the Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, down to Camera Raw. For the Windows people, I'm pretty sure that's at the bottom of the Edit menu, is where your preferences are. But at any rate, we want to get to Camera Raw. You want to get the Camera Raw preferences open. You can open them in Camera Raw as well, but this is just a way to do it without having to open a file. Can everybody find this part? Okay, if you click on Workflow down at the very bottom, you see where it says Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. That's typically on for me, But when you're doing focus stacking or panorama work like this and you're trying to open a group of files at one time, you can't, it doesn't support smart objects. What'll happen is that the first file, the first file will open as a smart object, but all the ones after that will not, and then either the panorama or the stack itself will fail. So if you're going to do this work, if this is your normal process, you need to come in and you need to turn this thing off. The next thing you need to do is, if you take a look at these, I'm going to go into the very first of the folders, select the very top one, hold down the Option key and click the last one, and then just hit open. You can select all the XMP files too, it doesn't matter. And what you'll see is it'll open up, you'll have all of your thumbnails on this. One of the problems in doing either focus stacking or panorama work is that you can't do any adjustments on the raw files because they come into Photoshop as baked files and then they're stacked together, and then by definition it's no longer a raw file. So you can't, number one, it's not a smart object, it's not based on raw data, you can't go back in and get that. So anyway, what you can do though is open these up individually and do all of the work that you would do on them as a single file. So I'm going to show you what I mean. Right now these are basically silver in nature. We're going to just do some weird perverted stuff so that you can see that this actually does work. I am going to go to my color slider, open up, I'm going to white balance, and I'm going to white balance, see the top of the apple box, it's sort of orange. I'm going to click on that to white balance, and it turns everybody blue. Stephen Klein blue. Then I'm going to go up to the very top. I'm going to select the three dots that are at the top of my thumbnail that turn blue. I'm going to do a select all, and then I'm going to go right back to that same little three dots and say sync my settings. And again, color is the only thing we've changed in this, so the default will be fine. And you can see that they're all blue right now, and then you simply click on done. So what we've done is we've done all the adjustments on each individual raw file, and so now when we do the focus stack, it will read that XMP data and that will get built into our focus stack. Make sense? Okie dokie. So our next move starts in Photoshop. It doesn't start out in the real world. We don't open up those files. You come up to your file menu, down to photo merge. So file, down to automate, down to photo merge. It'll open up. We're going to leave ours on auto. Again, we talked about the whole difference in what these other possible settings would be for distortions. In focus stacking, you don't really have distortions. You have problems, which we're going to look at in a second. But so auto is probably your best move for here, certainly the one that I would do. You do want to leave blend images together. You do not want to add vignette removal. You do not want to add geometric distortion, but you can do a content aware fill transparent layer. So what it'll do is at the end of the stack, it'll do a merge stamp version of all of them up to the top. And if there's areas that are going to be near the edges that might be transparent, and it will try to fill those in. You can always crop them out, but you might as well see what it looks like. And it's a separate layer on its own, so you can turn it off and throw it away. So it's not, there's nothing about that that is destructive. Click on the word that says browse, and then navigate to the folder that's in your session. Is it session 14, 13, 13? Yeah, do the stack number one and just select them all. Again, select the very top one, hold down your shift key, select the bottom one and say open, and then say okay. and nothing happens. Didn't work at all. So go back and close this up and do this the right way. Goes to show, when you don't do something like a whole lot of times really often, you just like fuck it up. Okay, so I just fucked that one up. That's how not to do it. This is for those of you who've been with me in my studio, any of my studios, this is an ambient light check right now. Okay, I just want to make sure that they hadn't changed something in Photoshop and it worked a new way. So, round 2, up to the File menu, down to Scripts, not Automate, Load Files into Stack. So again, you'll have something of a familiar screen that opened up. We're going to click on Browse. I'm going to go to those same 5 files, select the top one, hold down the Shift key, select the bottom one, go ahead and say Open to this. Do not select any of these objects, any of the things under it. Do not select Automatically Attempt to Align, because I want to show you this manually, or create the smart object. Just say OK to this. You'll do this for other kinds of work, like for instance, for people who do multiple exposures of a still life. This is a great way to bring all of those exposures. Let's say you've got 15 of them. It is a pain in the ass to open each individual image and drag one layer on top of your master each time, whatever. This just builds it in its totality right here. So you will see that we've actually got all of them now loaded into individual layers. But if you take a look at the top layer, so this is the one that's most visible to us, you can see that the 31 is in focus, but the area that's back into here, that's back in the I don't even know what numbers those would be back in there. Now, it's completely out of focus. If you scroll down to the very bottom of your layer stack, hold down your Option key and click on the first image, you'll actually see that that area back there is focused. So what happens in this focus stack is that I started the image with the one that was at the very top. I focused on the 31, and then I just worked my way back and shot picture after picture after picture. However, something changes when you focus. Now, this isn't something that most people are really aware of unless you do a lot of macro shooting. But the way a lens focuses is that either the entire lens moves closer or further away from the subject, or the internal elements move closer or further away from the subject. But regardless, the effect is the same. If you move closer to the subject, it gets bigger. If you move further away from it, it gets smaller. So holding down your Option key again, click on that same eyeball, the one that's on the bottom, and what you'll notice is that this ruler is actually changing in size. It's not only changing in focus, it's changing in size, which is a nightmare. You cannot manually fix that. Photoshop can. So to do that, make sure that all of your layers are on, select the top one, scroll down to the bottom of your layer stack, hold down the Shift key, click the bottom one, so all our layers are selected. This is now going to be a 2-step process. The first step is we need to align the layers. So when you do that, come up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Align Layers, and you'll notice right under it is Auto Blend Layers. That's going to be our second step. You do not want to do this first. It will fuck it up. So you want to do, again, just think about it, doing this in order from top to bottom. Auto Align Layers goes first, and this dialog box will open up, and you want to go ahead and say, yes, go ahead and do this auto. We're fine with that part. And now what I want you to do is scroll to the bottom of your layer stack, hold down your Option key, and click on the button on the bottom. And you'll notice now that the focus changes, but the image has been completely resized, so the edge of the rulers don't move. You will also notice that the image now, the only one that I have showing is the eyeball on the one on the very bottom is on. This is completely surrounded by transparent pixels. This entire layer has been transformed. It's a destructive move. That's why you can't do this on a smart, one of the reasons you can't do this on a smart object. But if you go to the next one up, you'll see all of them have been resized to actually then fit to go together. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? All right, so make sure you turn everybody back on again. So I just clicked on that edge where the eyeballs are and then just scrolled to the top. It turned everyone on as it crossed over it. select them all again. So I'm just going to select the bottom one, hold down the Shift key and select the top one. And now we're going to do the second version. Up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Blend Layers. And in this case, you're not going to pick panorama, you're going to pick stack images. You are going to do seamless tones and colors, check that, and you're also going to do a content aware fill transparent areas and say OK. And now you have got infinite depth of field. Look at the ruler, sharp front to back. Yeah, it works great. So I may have told you this story. I told you about the guy who was in one of my classes who really got into this and was really into shooting coffee shops. Yeah, it was his thing. He really loved coffee shops. So he went in for his this was for his final project. He found, like, I don't know, 20 different coffee shops. And he would go in, he would sort of like set up kind of a still lifey thing, whatever, kind of at the beginning of the doorway. And so imagine, the one that I remember the most was that it was like, imagine this long narrow space. So between these columns, like going from the screen here all the way back to the whiteboard, and sort of like only as wide as the columns part. That was the room, right? And the whole barista bar and all that kind of stuff was at the back, and this was sort of the entrance, and then there was tables that were between the two, right? So he goes into this space, whatever, and he focus stacks this thing. And he must have done, I don't know, 100 frames to stack this thing. I don't know what it was, but he had a little still life set up in the front of his little coffee cup that was sitting on something, whatever, and then, you know, the whole way through, he stacks these things, and then he prints them, and they were printed the size of 2 of those white panels. They were gigantic. They were at least 8 feet tall. I mean, they were insane, whatever. And you went and you looked at them, and when you looked at them in the beginning, you were just like, there was something that was just, you were like, there was something that just wasn't right, you know? And then you realize that it is tack sharp from the beginning of the foreground all the way through the space, all the way to the background. It is tack sharp the whole way. And they were stunning. And I was just like, I mean, it was insane. It was insane. The only other story that I've got that's somewhat similar to that is one of my best friends in the whole wide world lived in New Zealand, and his next door neighbor was into shooting landscapes. That was his thing. And so, apparently, I don't know, just from the sounds of it, you tell me, from the sounds of it, this guy had money. He built a rig. So imagine like a frame, you know, like the frame, like scaffolding, like they would use to, you know, to like, you know, work on buildings, that kind of shit. So imagine scaffolding about the size from this wall to this wall, and probably from the floor to about the ceiling. So that it was just a grid of like scaffolding, right? And then he had, I don't remember the actual count. I want to say there was 60. It may have been 80, but I think there was 60 5D Mark IIs that he anchored to each point on this frame to make a grid of cameras. He connected them all via computers so that he could control all of their exposure and shutter speeds and ISOs in mass, and then take one picture at the same time. So he had 60 frames of his scene, and then he would stitch them all together and then print them life size. So what he saw, so if there was a tree that was like here, that was like 3 feet wide, the print would have a tree that was 3 feet wide. And then put them up on the wall. And my friend said you would just walk into the space, and he goes, it was the most eerie feeling in the world. He goes, you know, we've all seen sort of like 3D photographs, you know, where you can do the split screen thing and the little viewfinder, whatever. He goes, nothing compared to the experience that you had looking at these images at that kind of resolution. He said it was the most unbelievable experience photographically, visceral experience that he'd ever had. So anyway, This is actually a great trick. So, but don't think about it only for doing macro stuff. So speaking of that, we're going to do one more really quick. If we take a look at the other focus stack group, you'll actually see that these are landscapes. So we're going to actually try a focus stack on the landscape and sort of see what we get in this. So you can see at this first one, looks like the bottom frame is focused on the grass that's on the closest to the camera. Then there's sort of a medium focus. The building in the background is still soft. It's about 3/4 of the way in, and then finally, yeah, the building is really sharp. But look at how soft the grass is in the middle. So let's see if it'll actually work. So again, in Photoshop, up to the File menu, down to Scripts, down to Load Files into Stack, browse for the files. They're now in Focus Stacking folder number 2. Select the top one, hold down the Shift key, select the bottom one, say OK, open. We are not going to do the auto align. You could do the auto align part here. I prefer to do it more manually once I get into Photoshop. Hold down the Shift key to select all of the layers, so all 4 layers are selected. Up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Align Layers. Say OK. I usually do a quick check with this by holding down the Option key and clicking on the bottom layer. Oh, and you can actually see there's motion in here. So the that one shrub that's on the right, is that a shrub? Shrubbery? Shrub on the right-hand side is actually moved. So it'll be interesting to see how the stack picks this up. With all 4 still selected, come up to the Edit menu, down to Auto Blend Layers. And we're going to leave it as a stack. We are going to do seamless tones and colors and content aware fill and say OK. Oh, and so here a warning, no pixels more than 50% selected in the visible edge. This is all about trying to build the content aware layer that's on the very top. So the layer that's on the top, you can either keep it or not. There was just not a lot of transparent pixels in here. But now when we take a look at it, it's certainly sharp in the foreground and it's certainly sharp in the background. So again, thinking about extending your depth of field in other situations you would actually work in. Make sense? All right, I'm going to show you guys one last thing because I've got 10 minutes to do it. You can close this guy up. You don't need to save it. The last file that I want you to open up, it's in that same week number 13. It's called cheerleaders.psd. And so this is something that you will likely run into your whole life. I don't know if your family has photo albums, that kind of stuff. But what happens here, do you have any idea why this photo is so red? What's happened? Or the color just doesn't last, it fades. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the reason most people don't want to work in CMYK is because you don't use equal amounts of CMYK to make gray. You do use equal amounts of RGB to make gray, but not CMYK because inks are deficient. You cannot get a perfect. Cyan is the culprit of all time. But if you go by and you look at any dry cleaner that has their little, their little poster in the window, whatever, you will see that a lot of times the cyan ink is the only thing that remains. But this kind of problem is classic. And the problem we have with this is, I'm gonna throw a term out for you right now. This is going to make people know that you are a color guru. It's called cross curving. So what happens in cross curving is that if we think about red and cyan, they're the opposite, they're the complementary of one another, right? So if you have too much cyan, you add red and you can balance the cyan out. If you have too much red, you add cyan and you can balance the red out. But what happens when you have too much of both? You have too much red and too much cyan. That's called cross curving. And what it means is that you cannot fix the color. because in cross curving, if you have too much red and too much cyan, you add more cyan to fix the red, and you fix the red, but now you've got really too much cyan. Or the flip side, you had too much cyan, too much red, you add more red to fix the cyan, and again, you fix the cyan, but now you've got a monster amount of red, right? So that's what can happen, and that's what's happening here, because the cyan color in this faded, and so we need to rebuild it. Now, you can't just go in with a curve and rebuild this thing because it's missing. That's what's the problem with this is. However, we can restore the cyan, but what we need to restore is not just a wash of cyan, we actually need to restore the cyan detail. Does that make sense? So if you take a look at this, what we're really talking about are the channels. So if you take a look at the channel, you can see that this red channel is extremely light. That's why this image has got so much red. In a normal photograph, this would have a lot more detail in it. And as a consequence, it would be richer in tone, and therefore you would have less red because all this red is coming through all of this white. Does that make sense, everybody? So if you look at the green channel, you can see here, it's full of tone. And if you take a look at the blue channel, it's even more full of tone, right? So if you just try to put a curve on this, you are not adding detail to this, which needs to be added to this. That's what you need to fix this. So to do this, this is something that you need to do in order like this. Again, this is like old school work in Photoshop as we've ever been in this class, because this is how color correction was done. There used to never be layers. None of this existed. There were no adjustment layers. None of that part existed. All the work was actually done in channels. So this goes back to that way. So to do this, you need to select your red channel. You can see it's highlighted right now, and then turn on the eyeball for the RGB. So what I'm looking at now is if you look at my channels palette, you'll see the eyeball is on for my RGB, which lets me see the full color. But the only thing that I'm going to be working on is the red channel because it's highlighted. Make sense? Then up to the image menu, down to apply image. This is where the whole apply image part ever started. And you will see that in apply image, the reason we had to select that red is that you cannot change the target in this dialog box. You'll see that the target right here is the cheerleader file, but the red channel, you can't pick this. So if this doesn't come up, you've got to cancel out of this box, make sure you select the target channel, and then go back into it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my green channel that actually has tone, and I'm going to put in multiply or add. You can take a look at add. So if we do an add right down here, you can take a look. It's going to be too strong, so I'm simply going to do a multiply. So that brings in a lot of color. However, it's too strong. It's bringing in too much. So simply use your opacity slider to drop this down until you get what you feel or perceive to be a somewhat normal color. So I'm down around a 56%, and that seems much closer to a normal color to me. So now I'm at a point where I actually can color correct this. So Command J to actually make a copy of it, up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects and convert to Smart Object. And then finally filter, camera raw filter, and then I'm going to white balance on the door. I feel like that's too strong. Command Z to undo that. White balance on a sock. Yeah, still too strong. I'll try the building. That works pretty well. No other way to do it. Questions? Yeah, so when you get that job where they got 3,000 images that are all Kodachrome 2 red, now you know how to fix it. And I will see you guys next week. Isn't that how all the photographs in the 50s were? Yeah, in the 40s? Of course they were.
Was it red back then? Yeah. I thought that's why everyone loved Kodachrome.
Actually, my whole first 3, 4, 5 years of shooting, whatever, were all Kodachrome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unforgiving.
Oh, you mentioned something about having a